Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a look at a whole stack of research organizational studies, HR reports, you name it, to get at one really big question.
A really important one.
Yeah, why are so many modern companies struggling so badly to genuinely include the 15 to 20% of the workforce who are neurodivergent? We're talking about ADHD, autism, dyslexia, the whole spectrum.
And I think it's important to say right up front, if you, the listener, are thinking this deep dive is going to be about, basic awareness training or ticking compliance boxes, you're going to be disappointed.
Oh, for sure.
The sources we looked at are all pretty much unanimous. Those old approaches are failing. They just don't touch the root of the problem.
Exactly. And that root problem, the one all our sources kept coming back to, is this concept called neuronormativity. It's this subtle but really deep assumption that there's one standard neurotypical way of functioning, a predictable way of thinking, of communicating, of focusing, and that this is the default, the best way.
The only efficient way.
Right. And when that's the invisible rule, anyone who works differently gets systematically pushed to the margins.
And what's so fascinating and what we really want to get into is that the mission is completely shifting. We're moving away from this idea of just giving accommodations to neurodivergent employees.
As if it's charity.
Exactly.
Right.
It's have a favor or just a legal hoop to jump through. The real transformative idea here is co-design. We have to start seeing these employees not as people to be managed or fixed, but as co-architects.
Co-architects of what, exactly?
Of entirely new organizational systems. This isn't about compliance anymore. It's about a kind of justice-oriented transformation that actually ends up building a better workplace for everybody.
Okay, so let's unpack that. I think we need to start with the definitions because the words really matter here. We hear neurodiversity thrown around a lot. What's the most important way to frame that for a workplace?
Well, the term itself just describes the natural variation in how human brains work. Autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and so on. But for our purposes, it has to be understood through a social model.
Meaning?
Meaning we are recognizing this neurological difference as just another form of human diversity, like gender or ethnicity. It is not a pathology. It's not a medical problem that needs to be cured or fixed.
So the problem isn't the person, it's the environment they're in.
Precisely.
So if that's the case, how does this neuronormativity, this default setting, actually build the workplace? One of the sources called it a disciplinary logic, which sounds pretty intense.
It is intense. And that logic shapes everything. I mean, everything. From the moment you even apply for a job.
Okay, like recruitment.
Think about it. We still lean so heavily on the traditional unstructured job interview. What is that, really? It's a test of spontaneous social performance. It's a test of making direct eye contact under pressure.
Not a test of whether you can actually do the job.
Not at all. It systematically screens out candidates who might have, say, world-class analytical skills, but really struggle with that specific kind of high-stakes social interaction.
And it doesn't stop once you're hired, right? It's in the physical space itself. The open plan office has to be the classic example.
The biggest offender. It's built on the assumption that everyone can tolerate the same level of sensory input. The fluorescent lights, the random noise, people walking past your desk all day. For someone with sensory sensitivities, that's not an office. It's a hostile environment.
Right. And then you get to performance reviews.
Oh, yes. The systems almost always reward a very neurotypical style of executive functioning. Constant multitasking, verbal check-ins, spreading your attention thin across 10 projects.
While the person who can do a deep, focused dive on one critical problem gets penalized because their workflow doesn't look productive on a daily status report.
Exactly. They get punished for not fitting the standard pattern, even if their final output is 10 times better.
Yeah.
And that's why, the one-off awareness training session just fails. It's all about compliance. It doesn't dismantle any of these deep norms.
Okay, so let's shift a bit. The ethical case is clear, but let's talk business. What are the real measurable costs for an organization that runs on this neuronormative default?
The costs are substantial. The first one is just blunt: talent loss. Organizations are literally throwing away exceptional talent because their front door, the recruitment process, is a biased gatekeeper.
They're screening out the very people they say they need for innovation.
It's an incredible missed opportunity. And then for the few who do get in, you have huge retention challenges. The turnover is just higher. People leave because the environment is stressful or misaligned with how they work best. And the cost of constantly replacing good people is astronomical.
And what's the third cost?
It's what the research calls an innovation deficit. When you only have one way of thinking, you lose your ability to solve complex problems. Neurodivergent people often excel at pattern recognition, systematic thinking, finding the thing everyone else missed.
So if you force them to multitask and conform to a standard process.
You're killing the very cognitive diversity that drives real innovation. You are actively trading breakthrough potential for bland conformity.
We've covered the business cost, but
Yeah.
what about the human cost? This is where it gets really stark, I think.
The psychological cost is just enormous. There's this heavy, heavy burden of what's called passing. That's where neurodivergent employees feel they have to hide their true selves just to fit in, to survive professionally.
It sounds exhausting.
It's more than exhausting. It's what the sociologist Irving Goffman would call managing a stigma. This creates a huge amount of emotional labor, that constant draining effort of monitoring your own behavior, your communication, everything. It's chronic identity conflict. It's basically burnout by design.
And that leads right into what the sources call the disclosure dilemma. It's a terrible double bind, isn't it?
It is the central trap. It's this choice employees have to make. Do I disclose my neurodivergence? If I do, I risk discrimination. I risk being misunderstood or sidelined for promotions. But I might get the support I need. Or do I conceal it? I avoid the stigma, but I give up any chance of getting accommodations, and I have to carry that weight of masking my identity all day, every day. Either way, you pay a price.
And it must be even worse for people who are at the intersection of other marginalized identities.
Absolutely. For a neurodivergent woman of color, for example, that feeling of psychological safety can be almost non-existent. The stakes are just so much higher.
Okay, so if the costs are this high and the moral case is so clear, why isn't every organization racing to fix this? The research points to 4 sort of core challenges, these pillars of resistance.
Yeah, the first is legal ambiguity. So we have laws like the ADA in the US or the Equality Act in the UK. They provide a baseline. But they often don't quite capture the reality of neurodivergence.
What do you mean?
Well, what about someone who doesn't have a formal, expensive medical diagnosis, but still needs a specific adjustment to their workflow? The legal frameworks often struggle with those nuances, leaving a huge gap between the law and lived experience.
And the second pillar is, frankly, it's pretty alarming. It's called stakeholder ignorance and indifference.
Right. Some researchers even call it ignorance as design. It's basically a system of willful avoidance.
Plausible deniability.
That's it. If you don't track the data, you can claim you don't have a retention problem.
Yeah.
If leadership is just indifferent, any inclusion effort is seen as a low-priority hassle, so it never gets real funding or support.
And the third, of course, is that disclosure dilemma we just talked about. It's a structural barrier.
A massive one. You can't solve a problem of exclusion if the people being excluded feel they have to remain invisible just to keep their jobs.
Which leads to the fourth pillar.
Yeah.
Straight up resistance to change.
Yeah, this isn't always, overt hostility. Sometimes it's just indifference, like this is some niche issue. But often it is overt backlash.
The idea that this is all just woke culture gone too far.
Exactly. Or managers who see things like flexible work or tailored communication as just burdensome. They're comfortable with the way things are, and they resist anything that challenges that.
So this brings us to the big question. If all the top-down traditional HR stuff fails against these 4 pillars, what actually works?
And this brings us right back to co-design.
The big idea.
The big idea. Co-design is a collaborative method. It positions neurodivergent individuals as the co-architects of the systems. They stop being the subjects of HR policy and become the authors of it.
It sounds like a true partnership, but how do you stop it from just being tokenism? Bringing one person into a meeting to represent everyone.
That is the critical question, and it's why the sources are clear. You have to compensate neurodivergent co-designers for their expertise and their labor. Anything else is just extractive.
I can hear the HR budgets groaning already.
Of course, but that friction proves the point. This is valuable consulting work. And beyond that, you need real representation, not just one person. You need accessible ways for people to participate. And above all, you need a psychologically safe space where people can say what they need without fearing it'll hurt their career.
This is where we need a concrete example. Let's talk about hiring. Microsoft's neurodiversity hiring program is probably the most famous case of co-design in action.
It's a perfect example. They realized the traditional interview was the gatekeeper. It was the system of neuronormativity in action.
So what did they do?
Through partnership, they scrapped it. They replaced the high-pressure 45-minute Q&A with these extended assessment academies.
What does that mean?
It means candidates come in for several days, and instead of just talking, they do. They work on hands-on projects. They solve real problems in a structured environment.
So they're being judged on their actual skills, their ability to code or analyze data, not on their ability to make small talk with a stranger.
Exactly. They move from judging social conformity to assessing actual capability.
Hmm.
And the talent they've found has been extraordinary.
And that collaborative spirit then filters out into policy and culture, right? It's not just about hiring.
No, the goal is to build a proactive accommodation culture. That means offering support universally, so people don't always have to disclose and ask.
Like with SAP's Autism at Work program.
Yes, they co-developed new systems. They made modified interview processes standard for some roles. They created sensory-friendly workspace options like quiet zones and adjustable lighting.
And crucially, they frame these things not as special treatment, but as upgrades for the whole office.
And that idea of universal benefit is so important for getting buy-in. The research is clear on this. The things that help neurodivergent employees focus, like better acoustics or noise reduction, they help everyone focus. Neuroinclusive design is just good, human-centered design.
And beyond the physical space, there's the relational side. JP Morgan Chase, their program provides trained neurotypical mentors for new hires.
Or in confidential channels for requesting support. It's all about reducing the burden on the individual navigating that disclosure dilemma.
So as we look ahead, how does this connect to the future of work? To AI and all the digitalization that's happening?
That is the next frontier. We have to be so careful to prevent what some are calling algorithmic neuronormativity.
That sounds complicated, but I'm guessing the idea is simple.
The idea is that AI learns from our existing biased data. So an AI recruiting tool might learn to flag a nonlinear career path or an employment gap as a risk factor.
Which are things that are more common for neurodivergent people who've struggled to find the right fit.
Exactly. The AI just automates the exclusion. The only way to fight that is to have neurodivergent people involved in designing, auditing, and governing those algorithms from the very beginning. The goal is to embed this into the DNA of the organization, to shift the whole contract from you must conform to let's co-create.
So when you boil it all down, what does this mean for the future of a company? HR's role seems to be shifting completely.
It is. It's moving from being a reactive, compliance-focused administrator to being a proactive catalyst for change. Someone who helps optimize both the technical systems like policy and the social systems like culture through co-design.
So what's the key takeaway for you, our listener?
I think the key takeaway is that neuroinclusion is so much more than a moral issue or a justice issue, though to be clear, that would be enough. It is a strategic necessity. It's essential for innovation, for talent acquisition, and for building a workplace that actually respects the dignity of every single employee. Excluding 20% of the population is just, well, it's an organizational failure.
So the path from the neuronormative default to a truly neuroinclusive organization, it takes courage, it takes resources, and it takes persistence. So for you, the learner, here's the final thought. How can you start to identify the implicit neuronormative design in your own workplace? Think about the last meeting that felt unproductive or the last performance review that seemed unfair. Was the system itself built for only one type of brain? That's your next deep dive.